It is 7:01. We will call the meeting to order. We begin with the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any additions to our agenda this evening?
No, there are no additions.
Do we have a motion to adopt our agenda? Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Up next is our annual reorganization of the board. We will begin by appointing the superintendent as chairman pro tem. Do we have a motion? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
As Chairman Pro Tem, I open the floor to nominations for Goshen County School Board Chair.
I nominate trustee Mueller for board chair.
Thank you, Trustee Chairs. Trustee Mueller has been nominated for the position of Board Chair. To accept that nomination.
I am.
I nominate Trustee Alexander for Board Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Gouliart. Or Trustee Anderson, are you? Sorry. Goodness, thank you. Trustee Alexander has been nominated for the position. Do you want to accept this nomination? Sure. Any other further nominations? Okay, we'll take a vote on each nomination in the order that they were made. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of Trustee Mueller for Goshen County School Board Chair. And please raise your hand if you are in favor of Trustee Alexander. Trustee Mueller received 3 votes. Trustee Alexander received 4 votes. I need a motion to accept Trustee Alexander as board chair.
Superintendent Kramer, are we allowed to vote for ourselves?
Yes.
I apologize. I did not vote because I assumed that we could not vote for ourselves. My apologies.
Problem. So we're gonna just go back up to the very top and just go back and redo the votes. Please raise your hand if you're in favor of Trustee Mueller. Okay. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of Trustee Alexander. So we do have a tie. In that case, then we would go back and accept other nominations because as statutorily required, we are obligated even in a situation where there is a tie vote to come up with a chair to move the meeting forward. So I'll open up. Are there any further nominations?
I nominate Trustee Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Phipps. Trustee Chairs has been nominated for the position of board chair. Are you? Okay. So now we have 3 nominations. Are there any other nominations? Okay, I go back then. Again, we'll take a vote on each nomination in the order that they were made. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of Trustee Mueller. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of Trustee Alexander. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of Trustee Chair. Trustee Mueller received 4 votes. Trustee Chair received 4 votes. Okay. Again, I will open up the floor for other nominations.
I nominate Wade Phipps.
All right, any other further nominations? Actually, I apologize, I did not conduct that the way I had in the previous ones. Thank you, trustee Sharp. Trustee Ness has been nominated for the position of board chair. Are you willing to accept the nomination?
Sorry, fine.
Thank you. You were waiting for me to get there, weren't you?
We're stuck still.
Again, keep in order for the three nominees that we do have. Please raise your hand if you're in favor of trustee Mueller for Goshen County School Board Chair. We have 5. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of trustee Alexander. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of trustee Chairs. Trustee Mueller has received 5 votes. Trustee Chairs received 3 votes. I need a motion to accept trustee Mueller as board chair.
So moved.
Thank you, trustee Chairs. May I have a second? Thank you, trustee Steinbach. Any discussion? All those in favor? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Aye. Okay, motion carries. So I'll ask trustee Mueller to change positions for me to hand over the chairmanship.
Before I leave, I was supposed to ask all of the newly elected officers to meet with Marcy afterwards to sign things.
Never gone.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Is Sarah shorter than I am? What's going on? With this chair.
All right. Bear with me a little bit. I would take nominations now for the vice chair. Trustee Chairs, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Any other nominations for the vice chair?
Chairman, I would like to nominate Wade Phipps.
Trustee Phipps, do you accept the nomination?
Yes.
Any other nominations for vice chair? So everyone in favor of vice chair being trustee Chairs, please signify by raising your hand. All those in favor of vice chair being trustee Phipps, please raise your hand. Any other nominations for vice chair?
I nominate trustee Alexander as vice chair.
Trustee Alexander, do you accept the nomination? All those in favor of vice chair being trustee Chairs, please signify by raising your hand. All those in favor of trustee Phipps, please raise your hand. All those in favor of trustee Alexander as vice chair, raise your hand. All right, are there any additional nominations? Are there any other nominations for vice chair? With that, please signify by raising your hand if you're in favor of trustee chairs as vice chair. Please signify by raising your hand if you are in favor of trustee Phipps as vice chair. Please signify by raising your hand if you're in favor of trustee Alexander as vice chair. All right, by a vote of 4 to 1 to 3. Trustee chairs is the vice chair. We have to do the musical chairs again. Next will be a vote for the board clerk. Do we have any nominations for the board clerk? Okay. I've already screwed up. All right. We skipped a step. We need a motion to, is it confirming? Accept Sarah Chairs as the vice chair. Do we have a motion? Do we have a second? Any discussion? All those in favor of accepting trustee chairs as the vice chair, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abst- Motion carries. All right. Now, board clerk, if you'd like to make your nomination. I'd like to nominate. Trustee Alexander, do you accept the nomination? Any other nominations?
Too many signatures.
I mean, if nobody else is gonna nominate, I'm happy to nominate, but is anybody gonna make a nomination?
I would like to nominate.
Trustee Phipps, do you accept the nomination? Any other nominations? Okay, will you please signify by raising your hand, all those in favor of trustee Phipps as the clerk? All right. Can I get a motion to confirm the clerk? Thank you. Can we get a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of trustee Phipps as the board clerk, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. All right, board treasurer. Let me get a nomination for board treasurer, please.
I would nominate trustee Sharp.
Trustee Sharp, do you accept the nomination?
I do not.
I have
You tried.
Appreciate your honesty. Any other nominations?
I nominate trustee.
Trustee Goulart, do you accept the nomination? Any other nominations? Can you nominate people?
We can volunteer for the committee, but not.
Any other nominations?
Would it be helpful to discuss the roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, sorry.
Also, we need to-
As the board treasurer, your name would appear on our facsimile with the board chair and clerk. The facsimile runs through all of our checks. It also runs both payroll and accounts payable. The warrants listing is prepared by us, and actually the board clerk is the signature that appears on legals. So it really, per statute, you're responsible for the bills.
We take care. We do the work for you, and you have the opportunity to review it. And then we put it forward in regard to publication. So it is not a significant workload. It is just a role in regards to that of the board and their responsibilities too.
With that explanation, can we get a nomination? Trustee Steinbach, do you accept the nomination?
Yeah.
Any other nominations? All those well, please signify by raising your hand. You're in favor of trustee Steinbach as board treasurer. May I have a motion to accept trustee Steinbach as the board treasurer? Have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of trustee Steinbach as board treasurer, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. All right, next on the agenda is designate depositories for school district funds. The recommendation is all banks and lending institutions in the county be designated as depositories for school district funds.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of all banks and lending institutions in the county being designated as depositories for school district funds, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is to set the meeting day and time. The recommendation is to hold the regular meetings on the second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. year round. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Second. Any discussion? Does this time seem to work for everyone? Any further discussion? All those in favor of continuing to hold the regular meetings on the second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. year round, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is board committees for 2025 as appointed by board chair. We're going to start with the WSBA advocacy liaisons. They're to represent Goshen County School District number 1. Already trustee chairs from this committee, so we just need one more position. Is anyone interested in serving on this committee? Trustee Sharp? Anyone else? I would appoint trustee Sharp to that committee. Next one is the WSBA board delegate and an alternate. So you have the delegate open and an alternate open. Does everybody understand what the WSBA board delegate is or what that individual does? Okay. Yeah, I got a bunch of yes nods, so I think we're okay. All right. Is anybody interested in serving either as the delegate or the alternate? Trustee Sharp. Anyone else interested? Trustee Sharp, since you raised your hand, do you have a preference as to the delegate or the alternate position?
I would prefer the delegate.
Trustee Steinbach, are you interested at all in the alternate position?
Yeah, I would do that.
I would appoint trustee Sharp as the delegate and trustee Steinbach as the alternate. The next committee is the Northeast Wyoming BOCES representative and an alternate. So we have trustee Hager already as the alternate, or will he become the rep?
He's comfortable in staying as the alternate. In this one, it does say at Gillette, they're via Zoom. So physical presence is not necessarily required in that.
Yes.
And it's quarter.
Sorry, does everybody understand what the Northeast Wyoming BOCES is?
In some ways, it's like an area education association. And so it's the conglomerate of the side of the state in regards to some other services. We do currently contract them for some of psychological evaluation pieces. So they have staff on hand that work with even smaller districts in Goshen County, or there's a collaborative. And so in order to continue their work with different things around that area, they have a board made up of the boards within the eastern side of the state. Anything else, Marcy, to add to that?
The other thing is, by being a board of cooperative education, they often do issue RFPs, which satisfy some of our RFP requirements. So you may see things come before you for contract services or purchases that have already been vetted out through the bid process.
With that explanation, is anyone else interested? Trustee Alexander, are you interested at all?
Yeah, I do.
I would appoint trustee Alexander as the rep and trustee Hager can remain the alternate. The next one is Eastern Wyoming College BOCES representative and an alternate. So trustee Hager is already on this one as well, so we need an alternate. Is anyone interested?
Mr. Chairman, could you go or Madam Chair, could you go through responsibilities for that?
So this one is a little bit more localized. So there are some the opportunities for in-person. There's also the opportunities for Zoom meetings that take place. I also attend those meetings in regards to what we kind of go through, but it's offerings through EWC really as our community college area. And so we look at course offerings that they have and they share those with us. We also look at the enrollment projections based on the districts that are serviced by Eastern Wyoming College. And so there's the opportunity to collaborate with the other districts within Eastern Wyoming service area in regards to also if they need any feedback from the K through 12, that is their vehicle to receive that information.
With that explanation, is anyone interested?
Madam Chair. May I also share, this is where our higher education BOCES mill funnels through the EWC BOCES. So the money goes to EWC. I then request it, but this group, this committee approves the financials of all districts participating in that BOCES.
I would be interested in that one and no one else.
That's right. I would appoint trustee Goulart and trustee Stanley to be the EWC BOCES representatives. There aren't any conflicts with. This is maybe. Or
believe so.
PVC or.
No,
Just know the players.
Yeah.
All right, salary relations committee, trustee chairs and myself are on that committee. Is there any, or first of all, do you know what salary relations is, or do you have any questions? Is anyone interested in salary relations? Anybody else interested?
that's the difficulty.
Oh,
Yeah, it's completely, I mean, it'd be up to the board to have conversation around that, because you are allowed to vote on salary when that comes up too. So it's not it's just kind of how you feel comfortable, and the rest of the board members also with regards to that. Yeah, go for it.
no, it's a lot. It's a big committee.
It's a large committee, the 3 board representatives. And so it's, we have representation from every building, every, job classification in regards to certified, non-certified, and there's varied positions within that. So, I mean, it is a rather large committee, and it's a good conversation piece, and it's really about, the availability of time too. And so if that's something that's, I, as a superintendent, don't see any conflict within that conversation, but want to make sure that everyone's aware on that, and we're transparent as possible on that. I don't think it affects anything, because again, there wouldn't be the obligation to abstain for the approval of that.
My concern would be that we talk a lot about benefits and compensation. I would be concerned about putting you in an uncomfortable conversation, or even the other members of the committee in an uncomfortable situation. So it would cause me a little concern. Not that you can't set yourself aside from that, but it's a pretty intense committee in a good way, but we get down to the nitty gritty. Trustee Goulart, would you be interested in serving on this committee? The only thing I will give you a heads up about, it is a big time commitment. One day every,
3 times. So
but it's,
we do one in the fall, one in February, and then we also have end of March, early April for the big salary relations. The other 2 are primarily take place typically from 8 to 3 or 4. Yeah.
that's the hardest part.
I would say this, if, we're not, due to lack of interest on, or the Christie, but.
Any other interest? Trustee Stampy, I think you'd be fantastic. I just do have those concerns about putting you in an uncomfortable situation. With that, I would appoint Trustee Goulart for the Salary Relations Committee. The next one is the Board Building Committee. We need 2 more spots. Trustee Fitz is already on that committee. Do you wish to remain? All right, great. Anyone interested in what is the Board Building Committee?
The board building committee meets typically about twice a year. It's not a huge commitment. What happens is Mr. Kramer, myself, Lonnie Britton is the maintenance supervisor, and then each building principal to walk the building based upon making maintenance requests. Those requests come to the building committee, and prior to items coming to the board, we prioritize and vet out those requests. for instance, there's an item on the agenda tonight. Because we didn't yet have a building committee, I just emailed Wade, the item, but, the architectural proposal would have been something that would have gone before the building committee before coming.
Any interest? Trustee Alexander? Anyone else? We need one more spot. I would appoint trustee Alexander to be on the board building committee as well as trustee Hager. District Activity Advisory Committee, the DAC representatives. Do you want to give a quick? Well, we don't need to fill those, sorry. Right, unless trustee Alexander or trustee Phipps is not, or trustee Hager is not interested in continuing. Thumbs up.
He likes those 7 a.m.
7
meetings,
a.m.
the night after the board meeting is when they take place, so.
All right, we'll leave those as is.
Yeah. So we meet monthly, and it is the second Wednesday at 7 a.m. We meet with the principals and the activities directors and discuss anything related to activities around any of the schools. There is certain policy requirements for the DAC to follow. If there's an addition or deletion of any activities, they have that committee and they are part of that process. They're also part of the process in regards to that is a line item within our budget, and the expenditure on all activities within the district is what they look after.
Moving on to the calendar committee, we've got 2 open slots. Is anyone interested in joining the calendar committee, which is kind of exactly what it sounds like? Trustee Steinbach? Anyone else interested? Okay. I appoint trustee Steinbach and trustee Scampi for the calendar committee. Wellness committee does not have any openings. It's trustee Alexander and trustee Phipps. Do the both of you, are you okay with staying on that committee?
Which one is that?
That is the wellness committee. You good with that, trustee Alexander? District policy committee, we have 2 openings. Trustee Alexander is already on that, on that committee. I'm assuming everybody understands what the district policy committee is.
We also meet once a month, and we meet the first Tuesday of the month at 4 o'clock in the afternoon here at central office, and discuss any changes to policy to send forward to the board for possible approval at the board level.
With that, any interest? Trustee Sharp? Anyone else? Trustee Phipps, are you interested in that committee? Trustees, oh, go ahead.
You want to appoint?
Trustee Chairs, are you interested?
Sure.
When you sit right next to me, it's like I don't see you.
It's handy.
So I gotta pay attention to that. All right, last one is the recreation board. This is the one that has 3 board reps and 2 community members. Trustee Hager and trustee Phipps are already on that committee. Trustee Phipps, do you want to remain? Any interest in the rec board? If there's no interest, I would like to join that committee or that board. For the curriculum. Okay, all right, one more, curriculum coordinating council. Currently is trustee Chairs and trustee Alexander. We need 2 more.
No, we
Just wanna make sure they're
would be willing to stay on, we're fine.
We get somebody else to do that.
Trustee Steinbach, thank you. Hey. Shoot, that was a lot. All right, information and proposals. Reports by board members who attended the WSB annual conference.
Trustee Sharp and trustee Goulier, if you have anything you'd like to share with the board. I know you were able to attend for portions of it and appreciate your time going up there and things. And if you have any ability to share or any interesting little tidbits, that would be wonderful.
Well, for me, the day going up on Wednesday was absolutely wonderful. It was all about the new board training and spending that day with all the other new board members. And there were existing board members that had experience, plus they had other administrative people there. Hearing all the different feedback was absolutely wonderful. It's well worth the time, and even if you've already been on the board, get a chance to go. It's definitely good. And then the breakout sessions, I had a great, lot of good information. Breakout sessions. As well, especially the one that asked the attorney. And I do believe the attorney that spoke with him, Scott,
Okay.
is he also the attorney for our district? That's what I was thinking. So anyway, that was well worth it. Very good. Appreciate it going.
Yeah, I would say that I was at the Wednesday orientation with trustee Sharp and Sue, and I don't recall the last name. I'm sorry? Okay. Well, she was extraordinary. We did about a 400-mile-an-hour pass over what it takes to serve on a board, and she did it in a very she made it bearable to, for something that you thought, oh, this is really gonna be a long day. She actually made it very interesting and very enjoyable. I appreciated that. And then I attended a couple of breakout sessions, one with Superintendent Kramer. The trauma one was interesting. It's called ACE. There was, I think the meetings were a little fast. It was 50 minutes, so it really didn't have time to dive into anything. There was really no opportunity for questions. And then the other meeting was not quite what I thought it would be, because the title of it was Reduction of Standards. So that was an eyebrow raiser, but what it ended up being, and maybe you can elaborate some more if I don't exactly get it right, but what I took away from it was that the state board of education had some unattainables, long, like hundreds of things that were never going to be attained. So they decided to pare that down and make it a little more reasonable. So it was good information. It was worth the trip. So it was certainly worth it. But by far Wednesday, the orientation was the best.
Thank you both for going. Strategic plan goals presentation by Lincoln Fort Laramie Schools. Mr. Gilchrist.
Thank you for the opportunity to come up here and go over this. When we hosted at Lingle, this document hadn't been completed, and it was nice to come back and revisit it, because as we set these goals and we started getting data in, we found out we set the bar a little too low on a few of these. So it was nice to revisit them. We'll have a conversation about these, and Mr. Kramer, if you have the opportunity to put that up there. The actual goals. Yeah. And Chairperson Mueller, Your Highness probably is not appropriate, so thank you for having me up here. So as we went through this, the first thing on here, we went through this with my leadership team, and some of this, it was a good thing that we had this done, because a lot of these things we didn't look at in a goal-oriented kind of view. And so it got us a little more focused on some of the important things that we're doing. For example, this SEL screener. When we looked at it, we've used it for several years, and I feel like we use it very well, but we never really put it in terms of reducing the number. We use it for identification. So as we went through it, we discussed like, what do we want to do to reduce that number? And so putting into place like the Leader in Me curriculum and some of the things that we're doing in the classes to help mitigate some of these things. For example, when we get the screener, we go through, and the big one in middle school, we'll identify organization as being a big thing. If you walk down our hallway and look at anybody's locker, you will see why that is a big thing. And so we'll identify those groups, do small group learning around those, and getting oriented around that to reduce it, I think is a good thing. We had set 90% proficiency, meaning they did not show up as an indicator, yellow or red. We came in right at that number this time. So looking at previous years, we had been in that 80 range. This year, for whatever reason, we're in 90. So again, a goal we'd have to adjust. The next one down is the Leader in Me. LFL got a little later start just because of timing, unfortunate circumstances. I only had a handful of teachers initially start the training, the Core 1 training. So I chose to, with the consent of our coach from Leader in Me and Mr. Derby, we elected to wait till all my teachers were trained to do the Core 1 training or to implement Leader in Me. So we just are getting the surveys out, and we'll get that data in. So we don't have a goal set yet because that's completely new to us for right now. We have started the curriculum, love the curriculum, very, very much kind of that growth mindset oriented type curriculum that our kids need. I can't blame COVID, but we've noticed since COVID that there's a general sense of apathy that we've got to address within our schools. And this addresses that. And I think it's going to be a very good curriculum for us. The next one down, extracurricular participation. We set the goal at 95%, and our 3-year average is 84% at the high school. And I feel like we do a very good job of providing opportunities. We set the goal at 95% because we understand that there are some kids, just because of circumstances, that the ability to do that isn't there. They're working immediately after school. Transportation is an issue. Because the conversation was 100% and we didn't feel like that was attainable. But we feel like going from 84% to 95%, we can certainly do that, because there's a lot of things with our FFA program, FBLA. There's a lot of extracurricular activities that fit into a lot of different personalities, a lot of different types of students. So I feel like we'll have and to try to avoid not going out for track at LFL is challenging if you've ever been in there and seen Mr. Lashley recruiting. So I feel like if he could step up his game a little bit, we'd probably reset 95%. Career and college pathway completers, getting kids their certification and industry standards. Right now, we're in the mid-60s, and we set the goal at 80, mostly because as we reevaluated the system and as the state has changed their pathways and their requirements and how they affect like the Hathaway Scholarship and things like that, we've adjusted, particularly in the business department, the type of certifications that we are going to use. Some of them, for example, the Excel certification is an extremely challenging certification, and we had a lot of kids taking that and not being successful on it. We've identified other certifications, I wouldn't say are easier, but are more appropriate to what our kids are going to be going into and will likely be more successful. So we set that goal relatively high. The next one down is elementary goal. And you've heard a lot about this over the course of the years, our Ames web proficiency in math and reading. 2 years ago, we had 2 out of our 6 classes reached that proficiency goal of 20% meeting proficiency in math and language arts. This last year, we had 4 out of 6. So a huge gain. We doubled the number, but we want that's going to be a non-negotiable every year. That will be the goal. Now, for one of those classes that didn't make it, we started out with almost 80% of the kids proficient to begin with in the fall. So that 20% growth is a pretty tough standard to meet. But we also want 95% of our kids meeting that goal. So if you can't make the 20, make the 95. That'll work just fine. The next one down is Y-top, and I've got a little brag board that I'll bring up here a little bit later. But we hadn't received the data back from the state when we set these goals, and we were looking at coming from my elementary that was partially meeting, my middle school was not meeting, and my high school was meeting standards. So we had just established meeting standards would be a reasonable expectation. When we got the data back, my elementary was exceeding standards. The middle school was partially meeting, which was a gigantic win, which I'll get into that later. And the high school was again meeting. So again, we need to adjust that. When you've got a school that's exceeding, there are numbers that can go to that. You can't go past exceeding in the accountability, but you can certainly gain from a 2.7 that we were to a 3. So there's opportunities to even increase there. For the ACT, the next one down, 21 was the goal we set, and that was set entirely based on the bottom number for the highest level of the Hathaway. If they receive a 21 on the ACT, they're eligible for the highest Hathaway scholarship. So that's why we set that there. We've made a lot of gains. I remember my first year taking over as the high school principal. I had been in the elementary principal there for 5 years, and I remember going across, got the ACT data, and I remember writing in very big letters at the beginning of the year staff meeting, 14.3. And that was a tough one. It was a tough one for all of us to see. I wanted to make sure it said 14.3. Like, that is not acceptable. And we've done a lot of work. We're doing, most of you have heard the presentation around the work we're doing around ACT prep, and we were at 18.7 this last year. Again, not close to our goal, but our what do they call it, the super score, which is the highest score between their junior and senior year, is approaching 20. So we're gaining, and I think we're doing a lot of good work that's going to get us really close to that goal even this year. We have a lot of high hopes with what we put in place for half a year. After that's been in place for a year and a half, I think we're going to do some really good things. Graduation rates, we put that at 100%. That's always going to be an expectation. That one's a challenging one for me. We're at 92.3 was our measurement for accountability. In my time as a principal, I've accepted transfers for students that I knew were not going to meet graduation requirements, but that transfer was absolutely in the best interest of that student, and so we accepted it. So there's a lot of variability that goes into that. The biggest thing is retaining those at-risk students, and that's what we focus on when we talk graduation. Behavior referrals, we're in kind of the initial, we looked at 3 here, historical data, and it's kind of all over the place. Moon phase, El Nino, whatever, makes that determination. There's a lot of variability that goes into that. Some of it comes back to staff training and expectations on what is an actual referral and what should be taken care of in the classroom. So that creates some variability as you have new teachers come in and do some things like that. Right now, looking at our last 2 years average compared to what we have going on this year, we're looking at a substantial decrease. And I think a lot of that comes down to probably protocols more than actual change in the behavior, unfortunately. In all fairness, we've gotten a lot more intentional on what is an actual office referral and what should be handled by the administration, and training teachers and helping teachers to support their own classroom and their classroom management. So I think that's probably has as much to do with that as anything. Absenteeism, we put a decrease of 5%. Looking at the historical data, of course, throwing COVID and the subsequent year out of that, we all know that the flu comes through. We know that there's a lot of things that come through that impact absenteeism. The biggest one we're dealing with is the chronic absenteeism that we're trying to address, where we have the students that are getting the 15 and 20 absences a semester. Now, there are things that certainly impact that, but it's one of those things where 80% of our absenteeism is 20% of our students. And so addressing that, and that's been a big focus of our high school and middle school PLCs. Not as big an issue, the absenteeism at the elementary level, but at middle school and high school level, it certainly is. And you cannot learn if you're not in the building. So that's one of the things We have very smart kids that when they're freshmen, sophomores, their innate intelligence allows them to be relatively successful, but eventually that gets outpaced by the curriculum. Eventually not being there catches up with them. And we've got several students now that we're working with that are running into that and trying to get them to graduate. So the chronic absenteeism is the biggest thing. So the 5%, we're going to work with that, see if that's a reasonable thing, and maybe we need to increase it, but that's certainly something we'll be looking at. The next one down was bullying incidents. We had one confirmed last year. So the year before we didn't have any. And the year before that we had 3. So it's kind of all over the map. We hope to reduce that to 0. And hopefully some of the curriculum that we're putting in place will help us do that. We get more bullying reports than that in a typical year, but through the investigation, the pervasiveness, the repeated nature, always addressed, obviously, but to be truly in that bullying nature, that harassment nature has to be identified. And academic dishonesty referrals, we haven't had a lot at LFL. We've had only a couple in the 5 years that I've been there. We haven't addressed them necessarily as a discipline issue. Got a lot harder when ChatGPT showed up. So it's becoming more of a factor of teaching kids how to use that artificial intelligence versus fighting it. So as those things come up, we just find a way to make sure the kids do the work. So as these academic dishonesty things come up, unless it becomes pervasive, we usually handle it at the classroom level with us supporting the teacher and creating an environment where we know that the kid did the work. So I guess that's it for the goals we set. Again, things really rapid view of what we're going through. But Mr. Kramer, if you'd put up the other document. YTOP accountability, and I'll kind of explain it a little bit, is kind of this, well, most people don't understand it, including some of the state people that I've talked to that have come to support us in the YTOP school improvement plan. But here's a comparison for the last 2 years. As I mentioned, LFL Elementary was partially meeting standards 2 years ago. So if you look up here at the 3 through 8 level, there are 3 factors that determine our score: achievement, growth, and equity. Achievement represents 35% weight. Growth is weighted 35%, and equity is weighted at 30%. Achievement's a simple one. It's the cut score, and if they're above it, they're proficient or advanced. And that number is an easy one to figure, above and below. After that, it gets a lot more convoluted, especially with the state. So growth is not a simple, did your kids grow X amount? They actually take the previous year score. They identify their academic peers. So they give them a group of 20 students, and they have to finish in the top half of that group of academic peers to be proficient in growth. So you can imagine some of the randomness that goes with that. If you get the wrong academic group, you may have grown 20%, which is huge growth, but everybody else grew 25%. So you finish in the bottom half. So you would not be identified as proficient within that group. Understand completely why they're doing that. We're comparing it, hopefully apples to apples, but does feel a little bit random, but that's how they measure it. Equity is, we want to make sure we're growing all kids, and we're focusing with equity on the low kids. So 25%, the 25% lowest kids on the YTOP score represent 80% weighting within the equity. So basically your score is how well did you grow your bottom 25% of kids in your school. So those are the measures that determine that. And as you're looking at this, you'll see our school score, and then you'll see the low cut and the high cut. So there's your marks. They give it to you right there that tell you if you're below that score, you're not meeting proficiency. In between those scores, you're meeting. And if you're above, you're exceeding. So you can see we did not meet the achievement score. We met the growth and equity score for the previous year that put us at partially meeting. This year, they did a great job. They did a fantastic job. we put a lot of different things in place through our intervention system. Jamie Kistler came in and helped support us in the building, putting in some different systems, changing things up, giving us a different set of eyes. And we met the achievement score, but the growth and equity score, like that's going to be in the top 5% of the state for growth and equity. That's historically. So that's big win. We went from partially meeting to exceeding standards. And that's a big win for my elementary and the hard work that they put in. So kudos to them. Now this one, when you look at the colors with the middle school, it doesn't feel as, there's not as much blue. But if you look at the middle school achievement, growth, and equity, we didn't meet any of those standards, and we haven't since YTOP was invented. From the time we transitioned from PAWS to YTOP, since then, the middle school has not met standards for the state accountability. So when I opened this and knowing how much hard work we put in, like if you walk through my building and you were looking at great teaching happening, you would identify my middle school as great stuff happening. So the fact, and they own this, like this was, every time this came out, it was a punch to the gut. It was beating them up, but they were working their tails off. We started putting some different systems in place. We added 50% time for our math and language arts at 2 grade levels at the middle school. And so when I finally hit enter and that data came up, I got emotional. I've never been so happy to see partially meeting on a report card in my entire life. That is a huge win. And if you look at the data and realize we got 75 students in my middle school, we met the growth and equity with the 53%, 49%, and 51 was the cut. If we had had one student meet proficiency in math and ELA or 2 in each, we would have gone from not meeting to meeting standards over the course of a single year. So a huge win for my middle school. Again, what the elementary did is historic, but I'm really proud of that. So any questions from you guys?
Good. Where you were invited up to Casper. A
Yeah.
bit too.
So the same week you guys were up at the state board, Trustee Alexander got the pleasure of sitting in that State Board of Education meeting with me. Very interesting meeting. But because of those 2 schools, the school improvement team invited me up to speak to them, just to kind of go through some of the processes that we did. At the elementary, it was less of a dramatic change and more subtle changes in our work that we were already doing. Again, different set of eyes, getting more focused in our interventions. And at the middle school level, really focused in the conversation with the State Board of Education, the 50% additional time in language arts and math for key classes, and the ACT prep work we're doing. Now, that doesn't sound like it should correlate when you're talking ACT prep and 6th and 7th and 8th graders, because we are asking 6th graders to take ACT questions. They do 10 questions every week, just like our juniors do, prepping for the ACT. And the theory being, to get really good at hard things, you got to do hard things. And it's interesting watching as we do those, they get the math questions, and the math questions are here. But they think they got them right, and they find out they got them wrong. They're the first ones running across the hallway to Mrs. Estes saying, what the heck did I do wrong? So a very cool environment. I think that's done a lot. They're doing really hard things. And so when they see the YTOP math, it's not as overwhelming. It's not blowing their hair back like it used to, because they've seen really hard math questions. So it was really interesting, because as we were conversing prior to when we actually presented, which they told me 9:30, ended up presenting at about 2:45. It was very close. But they already knew a lot of our data. I mean, they knew my elementary had gone up 2 levels. So the fact that the State Board of Education was already aware of what my school had done was very validating. So it was nice to, and it was nice to put some faces to names as we were talking about the standards reduction when you were having the presentation where the gal that is working on that was actually discussing why they were doing that and the process through it. I hadn't heard that. I mean, I was aware of the reduction and had participated in some emails around it, but getting into the thought process, I would advise you go one time to that for the background knowledge, but you might want to limit it to one. So, all right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Gilchrist, and bravo to you and your team.
Thank you.
All right, next is public comments. Do we have any sheets? Thank you. Mr. Massey. We'll remind you, sir, that there's a 5-minute limit. There are legal restrictions, the amount of board comment and the interaction during this portion of the meeting, and please, you already completed the form, so you're good to go.
All right. Well, I certainly won't take 5 minutes. I just had some procedural questions about your last meeting. I'm no parliamentary expert, but it confused me. So I would just ask the chair or the vice chair. Was the old board still seated and in control of that last meeting?
I believe so, Mr. Massey.
Okay. So were the new members seated on November 25th? Were they immediately considered voting members after taking their oath?
I think so.
Okay. Then I just
didn't
want to
study
bring,
for this test, Mr. Massey.
pardon?
I didn't study for this test.
I'm sorry. I didn't either. I just, as you know, that I ran for your positions and I did a little bit of work on Robert's rules. And again, I'm not expert and I'm confused at this, but at any rate, and then I'll close. Wyoming statute, section 22-22-202. School board members take the oath of office 10 days after receiving notification of their election. They officially take office at noon on the first day of December following the election. That's my own impression.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Any others? No? All right, we will move on to the consent agenda. The first thing is approving minutes of November 12, 2025 of the regular board meeting. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the board meeting minutes? May I have a motion to approve?
Are we allowed to pull stuff out of the consent agenda?
Oh, yes, you are. You guys, you have to keep me on my toes because I'm gonna screw this up
That's
for a while.
okay. We're all learning.
Yes,
I would like to pull out number 9.2, approval of minutes of the November 25th special board meeting.
any other items that the board would like to pull? Okay, with that, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda minus the section 9.2?
So moves.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda minus 9.2, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries.
Yep, that'll be the first item on old business.
Okay. Moving on to old business, 9.2.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
under new business, so go to old business first and then under new business will be the first.
all right, we'll discuss 9.2 under new business. Old business. Consider approval of proposed revisions to district policy 6111, the school calendar. The recommendation is to approve the proposed revisions to district policy 6111 as presented on second and final reading. Do I have a motion? For a second? Okay. Trustee Steinbach. So moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? With no discussion. All those in favor of considering approval of proposed revisions to District Policy 6111, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. Under old business, consider approval of proposed revisions to District Policy 3410, written standards of conduct for procurement of federal funds. The recommendation is to approve the proposed revisions to District Policy 3410 as presented on second and final reading. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
A second? Any discussion? All those in favor of approving, or excuse me, of considering the approval of the proposed revisions to District Policy 3410, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Now under new business, let's first go to 9.2. Which is approving the minutes of November 25 special board meeting and work session. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I would like to discuss the fact that the minutes indicate that the meeting was adjourned at 8:25 by Sarah Chairs. And Sarah had left following the personnel
You're correct.
discussion, so we need to make an amendment, I believe.
Do we recall who did make the motion to adjourn?
To my knowledge, there was no adjournment.
You're still on.
We did go into a work session. We did adjourn. I just don't remember who made the motion.
It wouldn't have been a motion to come out of work session.
We just would have adjourned.
Out of work session.
Oh, that is
We
true.
don't adjourn from a work session.
Right.
Just a removal.
So I just would, yeah.
So what are we doing?
Trustee Sharp, would you like to make a motion just to remove that trustee chairs move to adjourn from that meeting?
I am still confused that there was an adjournment. I never heard any word of adjournment.
So on typical work session, there's not an adjournment from a work session. So the adjournment would have happened from the official meeting. And so we wouldn't have adjourned from a work sessions typically.
Right, so we should have adjourned when she left.
Right. And then gone
then we
and
should have
entered
went
into the work session.
That's how I would have done it,
Yep.
but I didn't hear an adjournment, so,
We motion to move into the work session.
yeah.
To move to. Remove that adjournment from the minute.
Yes.
Strike the adjournment. Something, but he can make a motion.
Okay. So I believe that trustee Steinbach just did make a motion to strike the adjournment from the meeting minutes. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of striking the adjournment from the November 25, 2024 special meeting minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Okay. So given the revision to the minutes of November 25, the special board meeting and work session, may I get a motion for approval of the same? Can I get a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes of November 25 special board meeting and work session with the revision, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Next, new business is consider approval of 2023-2024 district financial audit. The recommendation is to approve the 2023-2024 district financial audit as presented. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
A second? Any further discussion?
And I apologize, I had forgotten to put your touchscreens on for the vote. And so on the new business will be available to you on starting on this vote. So apologize for that.
Any further discussions on the audit? All those in favor of approving the 2023-2024 district financial audit, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
You do have to vote here.
Any abstain? Motion carries. 11.2, consider acceptance of certified staff resignations submitted. The recommendation is to accept the resignations submitted by THS Spanish teacher Lisa Willie Racine, TMS THS instrumental music teacher Gary Glass, and LFL Schools physical education teacher Nate Jones, effective as of May 28, 2025, and TMS principal James Catlin, effective June 30, 2025. Do we have a motion?
So
May I have a second? Any discussion? All those in favor of considering the acceptance of certified staff resignations submitted as listed, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. 11.3, consider approval of offering a contract for a school psychologist. The recommendation is to approve offering a prorated contract to Jessica Davis as a district school psychologist effective Monday, January 13, 2025 for the remainder of the 2024-2025 school year. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. Any discussion? Mr. Kramer, I understand that by hiring Ms. Davis, that will replace some of the third party or contractors for the same services, correct?
that is correct.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving offering a contract for a school psychologist to Ms. Davis, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. 11.4, consider approval of proposed revisions to district policy 5131.25, student threats of violence. The recommendation is to approve the proposed revisions to district policy 5131.25, administrative regulation and exhibits as presented on introduction and first reading. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second? Any discussion?
I just want to make sure this is in line with practice with other districts. I mean, these changes and modifications, a typical practice of what other districts are doing in terms of threat.
So recently we undergone a training. And I'm gonna see if Trina would like to jump in here and offer some more information on that training, but I'll just keep going if she does. With our school psychs and counselors in regards to that system. And so after undergoing that training, they went back to the policy, took a look at it based on the forms that were provided for that training. And then this is the update for that information. It's pretty extensive and provides a lot of clarity. We had an existing policy that was, in comparison to previous districts I was a part of, certainly exceeded what I worked with in other districts. But this one even refines the practice of what we're doing. So I'm excited to continue this work with this policy and the update to that threat.
I'm here, Ryan. This is Trina. If anyone has any further questions on that.
Trina, what was the name of the training? It's escaping me.
It's called CSTAG. And don't ask me what the acronym stands for because I forget right now. But it's something that's used nationally, and we were fortunate enough that the BOCES 5 here in Wyoming has a grant that paid for the training, and it's also allowing us to have an online site that we can use to document when we need to do these assessments, and we'll track that for us, because it's more than just reporting a potential threat. It also walks the team through the process for interventions and supports for that student as needed. So it's very comprehensive. We have access to the online site for 5 years, free of charge.
Did you have any more questions?
Well, one follow-up question, and I'm assuming because it came from a training that this is covered, but this has been reviewed by either our attorney or an attorney at some level.
So it's based off of the Wyoming School Board Association model. Some of the vocabulary has been changed to adapt to the CSTAG training, but yes.
Very good questions.
Mr.
Goulart?
Kramer,
Trustee
Mr.
Goulart.
Kramer.
Trustee Goulart, go ahead.
On paragraph 3, with regards to parental notification, I noticed that in this version, the word promptly, insofar as notifying parents promptly has been removed. So it says parents will be notified by the principal designee when a student has been interviewed. So that's after the fact. I would suggest that if we've got a child that's where a threat assessment is being conducted, that notifying the parents should be job 1.
The challenge can be in regards to if that threat also could be involving with the parent too, because we do have the piece of where there could be links. I don't disagree. I think the one challenge we have is the timing of that and when and how specific we get. In those threat situations, they can kind of vary. And so what we've been asked is to be relatively not specific in timing. And that's why the removal of the prompt. Because define prompt, is that meaning when I find out when it is? There's a loose definition there, and so that's why the removal of promptly. It didn't actually contain where parents would be not notified, but it's the timing of it, because it still states in regards to will be notified by principal and designee or designee.
So would you say then that in a specific situation where the parent had something to do with this threat assessment being conducted, then you would make an exception in that case? But in all other cases, especially if we're getting into the serious and very serious, especially in very serious, you're talking, and you go through some of the questions, which are extraordinarily probing. So then we get into the question of, should that child at those levels have legal representation? And that decision would have to be made by the parents.
Right, and law enforcement does not, without an adult present, so that means that the principal or another adult has to be, when we involve law enforcement, has to be part of that conversation also.
Mr. Kramer, good.
Yeah, go ahead.
As I'm having been through this, and a lot of times when we have the accusation of the threat, on my part, there's confirmation, an interview to confirm that a threat was actually made. So in that instance, we wouldn't involve the parents, but it's deemed to be remotely credible, and we move into this process that you're talking about. Absolutely, at that point in time, you notify parents. So in my world, there are reports that aren't always accurate, and then part of the interview process is determining what is true and what is not. That wouldn't necessarily involve the parents as we're trying to sort through, but if we believe the threat to be credible or remotely credible, we would then notify the parents to start with this process.
So then maybe we would need to work on the wording reflect that reality. Because I guess the concern that comes up is, well, number one, a parental rights concern, because if my child is in the principal's office, I want to know about it immediately. And I really don't care about how serious it is. If my child's been taken out of class because of some discipline issue, yeah, I'd want to know about it. The other thing is, yeah, just making sure that if we're going to go into this litany of very intrusive questions, some of the questions are, well, I guess here's something that I would need clarity on. Who would constitute the threat assessment team?
So typically that will involve the school counselor. Could involve also dependent upon the student in regards to their level of if they have an IEP, any other special services that would also include, it would include the principal, vice principal, or any other ones I'm forgetting on your team, dean of students. Those are members of that committee.
And then going, if they graduate to the serious or particularly, again, the very serious threat assessment, where there's the potential of law enforcement or even criminal charges, if it rose to that level. I guess the question is, if we're asking these questions, at what point do those questions stop and law enforcement must be brought in? Parents must be advised of their rights. Parents must be advised that perhaps the child would need legal representation. I mean, is that written into these procedures, or would that threat assessment team be able to just go all the way through the questionnaire
So
before that happens?
So when you're seeing, guess where it shows, where's that checklist at? Or is it at the back? On which level? So on admin regs, not in the forms. So on page 154, you can see where each level and where that exhibit lies. So at a transient threat level, it's exhibit 2 on that level. And then serious substantive threat, you can see where the exhibits lie, and then very serious substantive threat.
So just using very serious threat as an example, we get all the way to, you have exhibit 7, parent guardian interview. Okay, so there's no specific line there where law enforcement would be brought in.
As soon after it is deemed a serious substantive or very serious substantive threat, then law enforcement and or Title IX coordinator notification. Then they would determine possible next steps in regards to where their piece of it would lie. The questions could continue, but it would be, we need to involve those of the notification. If it's a Title IX piece, that would advise also the administration on what next steps would be.
Trustee Alexander, were you part of the discussions in the policy committee surrounding these policies?
Somewhat, yeah, we didn't go into all the detail, all of it. I kind of had a question too about HIPAA laws. If we're asking about medications and things like that and history, I don't know, there'd be anything with psychological or mental illness or anything like that, would be heavy HIPAA law violations or anything as well.
Yeah, that would have been really good to have that conversation in that committee level. That might be the next step, to take it back to committee level so we can have those conversations at that and have those discussions.
We need to make a motion to.
That would be my advice.
Madam Chair, I think we also need to look at, I'm with trustee Goulart. We need to really clarify the legal part, the attorney part, because people can be self-incriminating with these questions that are being asked. And then where do we get in if we don't have law enforcement and they haven't been read their rights? Where are we getting to in some of these questions? And so I'm very concerned about that, because what we do not want to do is interfere with a legal process. And where's our liability in all of this? In assessing this, if we get it wrong, and we can refer them to legal, to law enforcement, where's our liability? So I think there's a lot of questions here that we need to address. Thank you.
I'm trying really hard not to play attorney because that's not my role in this board. But I will just tell you that rights are not what people think they are when your children are in school. It's a public school. And I will leave it at that because I don't want to be providing legal advice. But if it is the desire of this board to kick it back down to the policy committee to have further discussions, I would entertain a motion for the same.
The motion that we table this. Policy that we're looking at and move it back to the policy committee to discuss more detail.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Yes, and then also those board members who are part of that can certainly have open discussion there. Trustee Alexander, trustee Sharp, and trustee Chairs can enter into that conversation. Yep.
Did you take a note? Any further discussion? All those in favor of returning policy 5131.25 back to the policy committee for review and consideration, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. 11.5, consider approval of architectural proposal for summer 2025 major maintenance projects. The recommendation is to approve contracting with JEO Architecture for the design, bidding, and construction administration of 5 major maintenance summer projects as listed, not to exceed $189,400, funded by major maintenance. Do we have a motion? Do we have a second? Any discussion?
Were there other bids for these projects? How does that process work?
I'll let Marcy take that as she's been kind of the point on that project.
And the board was not, and the reason being is twofold. JEO is the only local firm. JEO is formerly Baker and Associates. We just completed JEO doing the architectural work. They were completed very with taking them. Professional services, and they're not required to.
So even though we're not required to put out an RFP, is that an option?
What we're doing here is looking at some past prioritized projects. And it's kind of kickstarting it, if you will, getting the proposal moving. If the desire is to issue it, actually what it probably would be, it would be more of an RFQ as opposed to an RFP. RFQ would be a request for qualifications. I would not do something like this based on price. And based on past experience, we've already kind of walked through that process.
Mr. Kramer, can you explain, you've explained it to me, but can you explain how kind of the major maintenance works in identifying, you know, what projects need to be done, how the allocation of monies works and so forth, so that we have a better idea of what we're looking at?
So major maintenance is kind of one of those silos of funds that we have that the state grants us on a yearly basis for the upkeep or improvements of our building. So we get a certain dollar amount each year. And so over the last 5 or 6 years, Marcy and I, through, as she referenced, those walkthroughs, those yearly walkthroughs, have been talking and working with principals on these larger projects. And so what we've tried to do is really address the smaller projects and then save some of those larger projects to do in one larger group. Another piece of this that is a specific one that kind of stands out is the LaGrange cafeteria. Now, also, in addition to all those pieces, state construction does more or less, would you call it an audit of the building or recommendation assessments of the building? And they go through each of our buildings and prioritize things that they see as this is a very high priority for you. You need to set this and utilize your major maintenance funds to address that need. And so in the situation out at LaGrange, that's one of the highest needs that we need to meet before we can do other projects. And that's kind of what you'll see on these larger projects is giving our ability to kind of save some money in those funds to make an immediate impact with larger projects throughout the district. Does that kind of, or was I missing a piece there?
How is the dollar amount for major maintenance formulated from the state? Is that based on square footage of buildings or attendance?
The dollar amount is based upon square footage of our buildings. And I would point to you to page 43 in the agenda packet. For those of you that are new, this is part of the consent agenda. This is the fund balance comparison report. This shows you that this is a month lag based upon when bank statements come and when I have them reconciled. But we have $10.5 million in major maintenance. This is money that the state's earmarked for us to upkeep our buildings. This is roofs, mechanical systems, flooring, the architectural of these types of projects. The other thing to note with this proposal is that this is a hourly rate not to exceed. So with the proposal, the architect would first do the design and we would be billed hourly for the design component. And then we would go to bid. And prior to going to bid, we'll get a budget number. That budget number would be shared with the building committee. And if the building committee felt that the budget was out of line, not appropriate, we could choose not to bid one of these 5 projects. We could bid these 5 projects and we would have separate bids for them. And in bidding them, one could come high and we may not like the pricing. We could choose not to go forward with that project. This is just allowing us to kickstart the projects, get the information, get an architect rolling. We would be bidding it throughout the month of April so that in May at the board meeting, there would be bids received. That would be coming before the board to make a decision if we would move forward with contracting and getting the work done over the summer.
So the building committee will review the bids and the details and then make a recommendation to the board.
The recommendation ultimately would come from the architect because the architect would review based upon the most responsive based upon price. They also would review completion of the bid package. But prior to the board taking action, the building committee would be involved in what the bids came in at.
The work included though in the architectural proposal includes design, bidding, and CA.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's broken out individually as part of that proposal for each individual project.
Kitchen and LaGrange not doing so well? Yeah. All right, do we have a motion to approve the architectural proposal for summer 2025 major maintenance projects? Oh, I'm sorry, we totally did. I'm sorry. Any further discussion? Oh, man. With that, all those in favor of approving the architectural proposal for summer 2025 major maintenance projects, please signify by saying aye.
I,
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. 11.6, consider approval of purchase exceeding $5,000 for the purchase of welders. Recommendation: approve the purchase of 4 Miller-Matic multi-process welders for LFL Agriculture Education from Airgas in the total amount of $15,590.08. This will be funded through the Perkins Grant Funds. Do we have a motion? Do we have a second? Any discussion?
What is going to happen to the current developers that are probably still functional, but not great?
So I have not visited with Mr. Groney, but would I go through the process of what we would, yeah, we're gonna go with those and just reference those. I know 2 off the top of my head now, what third one are you coming up with?
State statute allows districts 3 options as far as disposal of equipment. We can request sealed bids by advertisement. We can sell equipment at auction. Or if the equipment is to be disposed of, it would be disposed of appropriately.
Okay, so we don't necessarily know the disposition of the current welding machines, whether they're in some sort of disrepair.
They're pretty rough.
Uh,
I would say functional would be optimistic, but yeah, we're in desperate need. And I would say anybody coming in to do an evaluation on them probably would deem them to be disposable, but that's a better conversation for Mr. Groney, but that's based on the conversation we had when he put together the Perkins request.
Any further discussion?
If we sell them or something like that, do we have to turn that money back in to the state or?
What we have to look at is we have to look at the time frame of when those welders were purchased and how they were purchased. And that's information that I don't have. But if they were purchased with federal money, they would have to go back into the federal program budget.
We don't appreciate it out to a 0 value or nothing.
That's where we have to look at the life of them.
Great question. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving the purchase exceeding $5,000 for the purchase of the welders at LFL in the amount of $15,590.08, please signify by saying aye.
I,
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. 11.7, discussion of leadership governance item 2.3 about meetings. The recommendation is to discuss and propose possible revisions.
I'm just gonna start a conversation related to that from when we had our work session. So there was discussion around 2.3 and that was very strange. One of the pieces, and I'm gonna bring this up. Guys, I had it up on one screen and it changed. Okay. So in that language, we have very specifically the timeline in regards to a quorum physically present, which was discussed. And then also at least 24 hours before the meeting. So these were things that when we were very early on in the infancy of Zoom and things, we didn't know exactly how it would look in regards to leadership governance. And so this was added during that time period. So some new language that could be suggested is a quorum may consist of board members who are physically present or participating through audio conference. And then also, it is very easy to invite anyone to a Zoom. So really, it can come down to as early as 15 minutes before the meeting, and it's pretty easily set up, just depending upon that individual. And so those would be the significant changes. I did also, there was a family or other emergency. I said also I added event to that for some more specification on what that might look like for the reasons for missing a situation. I know there have been times in which, for instance, this evening, where we would have had the ability to have the ninth board member possibly take part, but the emergency came up in short time before the existing meeting, so they weren't able to take part in the meeting because it wasn't 24 hours in advance. Really, for us, again, Zoom wise, it takes about less than a minute to copy and paste the invite and include a board member at that if we wanted to make those changes to leadership governance on item 2.3.
I think that's probably the way to go there, but the only thing would be, since it's kind of hard to understand on Zoom, should it be a roll call vote when there's more than one Zoom person on Zoom?
That's a great idea.
I personally think that since we're all a team, that we really, when we ran for this office, we ran with the idea that we would be present at these meetings. The public depends on us, and that was their impression. And so I do believe that we should make every effort to be sitting in these chairs. And that we have a responsibility to those people who voted for us to do that. Zoom or a telephone call does not give them that opportunity to see us and interact. And so I do believe that we should be here. It was a consideration when I ran, and I think it's a responsibility.
Any further discussion?
I agree with that. A couple of months ago, I was that day.
I understand people have to miss. Yeah, I understand people have to miss. We all have emergencies. But we can function as long as there's 5 of us.
So trustee Sharp, I would respectfully disagree just a little bit in that this is a school board, it's a voluntary position, right? Like, we're not paid. Yes, we're elected. I've had situations where like my son played baseball in California, and I'm not going to miss that. But I also have duties to the board. And so I wanted to fulfill those duties and appeared via Zoom. And I wanted to still participate. I also was in numerous committees that were presenting things at the board meeting and so forth. So I personally felt like I was letting the board down if I didn't attend by Zoom. I agree with you. We should make every effort to be here if we can. But I also think that we do need to be a team, and I would personally encourage all of us to attend, if no matter what form that is, but preferably in person. But that's just my opinion.
No, I totally understand, and I am totally, it would make a difference too. But, and I have my own priorities, my own issues at home.
Sure.
But I do that twice.
Sure. Trustee Chairs, were you going to add something?
I was just gonna say, I think it defeats the purpose of calling in on a Zoom meeting if you don't count towards quorum. It kind of defeats why bother calling in if your voice doesn't count towards quorum. So I think that this is an important adjustment to this piece of our board governance.
Madam Chair. If we do consider the Zoom, then I do believe that we should be required to attend the entire meeting and not just come in for just certain votes. I don't think that's appropriate at all. Because if we're gonna be part of the team and if we do approve Zoom, then it needs to be for the entire meeting. And you shouldn't just be coming in for picking pieces out that you want to support, any one individual wants to support. So if it's part of the team and we're gonna approve Zoom, then I do believe it should be for the entire meeting.
Superintendent Kramer, what do our board governance say about attendance? Do we have any requirements on attendance or? Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the
No,
spot. I'm
you're
just
fine.
wondering.
We do have, under 1.1, it really doesn't give specifics. One of the big pieces that references that the board will hold itself accountable for governing with excellence. There's not a specific attendance policy per se. And it just, I think, is kind of inferred in a number of places, and, especially like this, where that it is outlined too on the reasons, in that A, B, and C, 4 reasons why you would miss and still take part. I don't know. And any other board members certainly can jump in who've read through the board governance. I don't remember anything on the entirety of meetings. I don't know if I've seen that, but certainly, like I referenced there, I put 2 questions marks on roll call and participate in the entirety of meeting. Certainly can be, as this is your document as a board, and where you want it to go.
I would say in regards to that as well, we don't currently have that expectation for in-person meetings. We've had people have to leave early for various reasons for in-person meetings as well. So if we're trying to create some sort of equality between a Zoom meeting and an in-person meeting, you would need to take that into consideration.
What would we call an acceptable definition of a family event? I mean, to hold people accountable that they just, every time they attend the meeting, it's via Zoom. I have an event going on. Where do we draw the line? And how often?
That brings up an interesting point, though, because when you say hold people accountable, what does that even look like? As elected officials, there's really nothing we can do other than encourage one another to follow our board governance policy.
And to show up and to participate, right? We can't force any of the board members to do that. So I hesitate just a little bit to require someone to participate in the entirety of the meeting. I'm hopeful that the board members are wanting to do that, right? And fulfill their duties as public officials. So I struggle with the idea of forcing that. I don't know. What does everybody else think?
Well, the old definition, we had a specific outline of what we knew we had to go by, period. And now it's getting really vague where anything goes. Just my opinion.
I agree with Chris, or trustee Alexander. We do have a transparency and accountability that we have we are elected officials, and we may not. So if we have to hold ourselves accountable. If the board doesn't hold us accountable, we have to hold ourselves accountable. And if we see that we cannot do that, then we don't deserve to be here. So if there are people who cannot do that, what do you say? We have got to do that. We were elected, we are accountable to be here. That's what I have to say.
So one of the other potential outcomes that would concern me is that we could have a meeting where Woody's here at all, Zoom, all of us. And how does that look for the public? How would they participate in that meeting if the entire board is on Zoom?
I will tell you, in the entire time I've been on the board, like Zoom has always been an option. We just had the 24-hour notice before. We've never had that happen. At most, we've had one member of the board at a time via Zoom. And again, we're all adults. We're all responsible. I'm hopeful that that's why we're all here. Like none of us are being forced to be here, right? We all want to be here to help the district. So I've not seen it be a problem, frankly. And there's nothing in the board governance requiring attendance per se, I guess, or how that looks. So I don't know.
Is anyone familiar with how other elected officials handled this issue? So like city council, the county commissioners, any of those offices?
Trustee Steinbach.
City council allows you to be present via Zoom. There's no, in terms of the accountability on the board policy, there's no requirements in terms of attendance and, I mean, like trustee chair said, we're all adults, we ran, we were elected to these positions and with the understanding that we are going to hold ourselves accountable. And it was the same on the city council.
Thank you.
I also just want to say that I think that having the opportunity to participate through technology does the opposite of, I mean, it actually holds us more accountable because we have no reason not to participate then. And I think that if we, I don't know, go against, at the college, we attend meetings via Zoom all the time. I know in like other parts of the world, people work remotely all the time. And I think that would be taking a step back to kind of put limitations on how somebody could participate in a meeting like this.
I might add, my entire job, excuse me, sorry. My entire job is remote. I work from home. And so, we have pretty intense meetings, very important meetings with high ranking officials across the country, and we all attend via Zoom. And it's never, I just think we're all adults and we want to be here. We want to provide, we want to serve, and we need to be individually accountable for that to our constituents.
Chris, would you feel better if we removed the word event? Would you feel better if we removed the word event? If it was a family or other emergency instead of event? Because that's the only thing that changed the specificity of why a person cannot attend a meeting. When you said you felt like we were getting too vague with that portion. Yes, so would you feel better if that event was removed? Mhm. Well, the only change between the first one and the new one was the addition of the word event to the reasons that one cannot physically attend a meeting. So is that where you felt like it got too vague, was because we put because event was added in there?
Are you concerned with based on different,
In the new language?
in the old language, I think that the new language offers more specificity because that's the challenge that we had in our office is some interpreted it a family situation and others interpreted or another emergency. And so that
Sure.
it was actually added to add more clarification, not take away or broaden it.
Well, and I struggle with that in general because who are we as adults to decide why someone can't attend a meeting to begin with? But I was just wondering, because Chris, you had mentioned that specifically, that you thought we were getting too vague, but it was just the one word that changed.
I just struggle with us needing to police each other, to be honest. I feel like we are all adults and professionals and we chose to be here. And we're here, to conduct business for the school district. And I just really struggle with us forcing things. I mean, if you're here and you participate, then that's great. If you choose not to, that really is on you and you have to answer to the public. It sets the tone, I guess. And the conversation came up about changing this particular language because we were wanting to allow board members to be more involved if they were not able to physically be here. I mean, that was kind of it. Again, I sat in a parking lot on Zoom during a baseball game, right? So that I could participate. That was a choice. And I think that we as adults should be able to make those choices individually, as opposed to the board policing each other.
Well, now, as the policy was written before, that wasn't the problem. I mean, that you weren't hindered from doing that. And even the 24-hour notice could be waived if it wasn't practical. I mean, if you had an emergency on the way here, obviously you're not going to have that notice. So really the only thing we're discussing is whether or not a quorum should include Zoom at the end of the day. Is that fair?
So, but to your point, is it typical that you would waive that 24-hour? Because you said tonight there was a situation where,
We haven't waived it in the
okay,
past.
since it's not typical that we would waive that, I would prefer that we keep that 15 minutes in terms of the change.
And quite honestly, I'm okay with 2 minutes before, because again, it was more set up, 24 hours was thinking, oh, it takes so long to set up Zoom meetings. Really, again, it takes, hey, I got to cut and paste it and text it to you and we're good to go. And that's all it takes. So, I mean, whatever is more convenient, or we leave it out of time. They must notify the recording secretary or superintendent before the scheduled meeting. We could take the entire frame out of it. As long as it's before the meeting starts. For me, it's makes no difference for that.
If it doesn't make any difference to you, why don't we remove the 15 minutes? Because I thought that the notice was mainly to help Mike or yourself to be able to send the link and what have you.
It really honestly takes about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm reducing it now. Maybe longer for Mike.
Yeah.
I guess the only other thing I would add is I don't object to being able to join into a meeting on Zoom. The quorum issue, that's a sticker for me. I think a quorum should be physical before the public. And if we have a couple of board members where coming in on a Zoom is the only way they can make that happen, I don't see why that shouldn't be acceptable, but the quorum question is a sticky one.
I was just gonna say that I was gonna agree with trustee Goulart that even if we allowed Zoom and we didn't have a quorum here, then we're gonna have to maintain the person on Zoom for the entire time, because the minute they drop off, we no longer have a quorum and we no longer have a meeting. So it's much easier if we have a physical quorum, which is what we have in our policy now. If we have a physical quorum, then whoever joins in on Zoom is fine. Because that's 5. So there's 3 or 4 people that can be Zoom, and that I don't have a problem with that.
But then if those people on Zoom are not part of the quorum, does their vote count? Okay.
Oh, so you're saying it wouldn't be a quorum counting them, but their vote still counts?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying they don't get a vote, no. I'm just saying, if we only had 4 people sitting here and we had 2 people coming on Zoom, and they both only be part of the meeting, we lost our quorum. So we need that 5 sitting here. And that still allows 4 Zooms, and imagine we never got 4 Zooms. That's the big thing I'd like. Is I don't have a problem with Zoom. I don't have a problem if it's somebody's kid's game, you know, or whatever. Because I mean, there's gonna be a time I'm gonna go to my mom's birthday. or something. But we gotta maintain that one.
What do we do with bad roads, right? Because that's kind of a reality for us.
It can be, but all the time. Not anybody.
Some of us don't
I will
live-
not be doing that.
Some of us don't live that close. You what?
We can move, plus we see.
That's true.
Well, we say.
Yeah, but if there's requirements for advertising ahead of time. And so that would be, if we do call the meeting, most of them they do need to take place.
I guess the example that came to mind for me was we occasionally have special meetings for like a bid package or something, like something that is time sensitive that doesn't fall within the time restraints of our normal board meetings. And it is actually really hard to find a time that works for all 9 people. And I don't remember, I know we've had a number of these in the past. And I don't remember how we've handled them. Perhaps we've gotten lucky and we've had a physical quorum present, but I don't feel like it's an issue of transparency to our people that elected us, because we are still being transparent. We are on Zoom, we are recorded. You can get online and watch it at any time. So again, I think for the most part, we're gonna have physical quorum for our regular board meetings, but there are situations that arise. And changing this would just give you that option to still have a quorum, even if Zoom was an option, the only option.
How often can we change this if need be?
We can address it at any point in time. There's no specific reading requirements or steps. It is the rules of the board that can be adjusted to their purview.
I mean, is that something we should try? Is one, you know, either this version or different version, see how it works, and if the board doesn't feel like it's working, then we readdress?
That would be my preference. I think that we can try, and I guess I think if we do come to a situation where we have people who aren't attending for whatever reason, I agree. I don't think that we need to police each other. But if it becomes an issue for the board in general, then I think we readdress it. We bring it back up. But my preference is that the quorum stays with, that includes the Zoom.
Yeah, I think we can work on some language, like the roll call piece. I think we can work on I'd like some time to work on some language if possible, if that would be all right. And take a look at that.
With
Just to see if
Mr.
we can-
Kramer's request, can we get a motion to table this to allow him to work on the language a little bit and then bring it back to the board?
I would need to table this and bring it back another time with new language.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
One other question. While we're looking at things on the meetings and everything like that, can we also discuss number 4? Which is establishing the operational procedures for meetings using modified Roberts rules. I'd really like to know what they are.
But what type of suggestions do you have?
Well, if we're gonna establish the operational procedures for meetings, that means we're changing what the normal Roberts rules are, correct? So, and that's for running the meeting. So if we're gonna change something in Roberts rules, it'd be nice to know what we're going to change. I have no clue, because it seems like right now, if something comes up and we want to make a change, it's just on a whim and it gets changed. Rather than everybody knowing what those things are that we can change or are going to change and use differently than what Robert's rules says.
That sounds like an excellent committee topic. I mean, it just seems like something that maybe needs quite a bit of workshopping. So if there were members of the board that would like to get together to discuss that, I mean, we can certainly do it here if you would like, but that seems like kind of a heavy lift.
Well, maybe so, but it's just something while we're here, and if we're gonna postpone this, something else we need to work on there, I think, because I'd really like to know what those procedures are.
My only thing is I would caution the board against a strict use of Robert's Rules of Order. It almost makes it difficult to have conversations and to encourage discussion and so forth. I represent several boards that do that. It's very complicated at best. So, but I agree, Trustee Alexander, that if we need to define what modified means, I think that's a fair request.
Because most boards, excuse me, usually just use Robert's rules instead of modifying them. Or a lot of them do. And if they modify it, it's something simple like the consent agenda or something like that. But I've watched a lot of different board meetings and looked at and talked with some other people on different school boards, and they pretty much go by Robert's rules rather than making different changes.
It's a difference between using modified and loose Robert's rules, right? And I feel like this board uses more loose Roberts as opposed to modified, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, in discussions with our school attorney, it's been based on the modified piece and that there's a structure to it for purpose of maintaining order, but not necessarily dictating exact steps before conversation and open dialogue can take place. This is kind of the difference that has been explained to me, but I'd be glad to research and see what other districts, if they're not using modified, what other options they might have out there, what there might be suggestions from our school attorney, Wyoming School Board Association, all of those entities might have some suggestions.
Well, just with my interpretation of the way that reads, to establish operational procedures for meetings would be like how we structure our agenda and that sort of thing, and then followed by using modified Robert's Rules of Orders. So I guess I don't read that as the board will establish what modified Robert's Rules of Orders look like so much as we will establish our operational procedures. And I might just be reading that wrong or differently than you are.
So the motion before the board is to table the discussion of leadership governance item 2.3 pertaining to meetings, allowing Mr. Kramer an opportunity to rework some of the language to make a recommendation to the board. With that, all those in favor of tabling the same, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Next is board topics for discussion. Do any of the board members have anything that they would like to discuss or seek input from each other on timely topics?
Madam Chair, I would just have one quick question about the amount and frequency of resignations that we are seeing. And I'd like to avoid any detail that would make us go into executive session, because I think we could have a discussion without going into specifics that would require that. But at what point do we see this flow of resignations as and if you'll forgive the automotive analogy, a check engine light, where we need to look under the hood, particularly if this is going to continue? Do we need to start asking some questions? Do we need, where do we go from there to stop the hemorrhaging, if that's in fact what's going on?
Trustee Goulart, I think it's a fair question. I ask Mr. Kramer the same thing every time I see them, but I'll let him answer kind of how he answered me on that.
I also think I have some things to add to that too. I think what would be good probably is for the January meeting to have Holly present kind of our numbers, our data and comparability, because we can talk about the eye feels, I think, a lot, but until we have Holly have an opportunity to kind of present that information, I think that would be really important to kind of give us a baseline of, yeah, here's where we're at. Here's the exact numbers. Because yeah, sometimes it's going to feel like that, especially when salary relations, then the board approved an early incentive for early retirement. Yep, that actually accomplished exactly what it was set out to do. Get some of our harder to fill areas with resignations in December prior to February, because those 2 months mean a lot on our resignations. And especially for those who are planning due to retirements, looking at the twilight of their careers and advanced planning. And that's really in these earlier times what we saw. If you look into some of those, but I think again, if Holly's able to share some specific data over the last couple of years, I think it would be pretty informative if we can do that in January, if that works.
Is there information to compare to other districts for that number as well? Thank you.
Madam Chair, one thing I would like to add is, the ones that are retiring tonight, one thing to keep in mind is, that Wyoming retirement system, for most of these folks have a rule of 85, which years of service and age equal 85. So, what we do see, is many of these, in fact, I believe, I don't want to misspeak, but I think all of these folks tonight reach the rule of 85. So they are eligible for full retirement from the state of Wyoming. So that is perhaps slightly different than what we might see outside of the world of academia.
Thank you, Holly. Any other topics that the board would like to discuss? Briefly, since this is a new board, one of the things that we have implemented is traveling to each of the schools every month for the meetings. Is this board still okay with that? There's still an appetite to do that?
Where are we going next?
LaGrange,
Really fun.
Mr. Daly.
10 minutes.
Finally, Sarah and I don't have to drive so far.
So the weather can be in January for 2 of us.
I heard there's gonna be a potluck.
That's in the word.
Oh, if only you had that new kitchen.
But we have enough outlets for potluck. Right.
Promised a Hawaiian.
Oh, yes. Anything else that the board would like to discuss? Thank you. So future meetings, the next regular board meeting is on Tuesday, January 14th, 2025 at the LaGrange Elementary School. WSBA is offering their winter board development workshops online. Those 2 attachments have been provided. And then the 2025 Annual Legislative Forum hosted by WSBA and WASA will be Sunday, February 2nd, 2025 at Little America in Cheyenne. And now for the superintendent's report.
I just have one item to share, my typical sharing of the enrollment data. And for this month, I just illustrated those that had a decline. And a decline in red indicates a decline from the right column, which is last month, and a decline from the previous year. Some of these can be attributed to just as grade levels move up. We know some grade levels are larger than others. And so as you, like in the middle school, when you have a total, that could be because your freshman class was very large and they were in 8th grade last year. And so that left column is a little bit deceiving sometimes in numbers. One thing though, of course, as I kind of just scroll down to the bottom to always be aware of is just that total. Now, one may ask, how do we vary so much in regards to that ADM? there is a lot of variances in attendance and those things that are all factors into that ADM and how they occur. Also, how do we get in, TMS situation, how do we get 0.55 of a student? So that might be attributed to them attending a portion of a day and then that average daily membership. And so they were a member for a portion of that month. And so they might not be worth necessarily a 1.0 student equivalent. And so that's where we get those partials in. And so right now we're sitting at 1,585 students. Last month was 1,591. We do again take it. There's a lot of averaging going on in our funding formula. It's not just 1 month. It's also the average of an entire year. And then it's also the average of the 3 years that we're funded on. So variances are pretty evened out because as we still have attributed that 1,635, 1,611, those are previous years moving from left to right. And kindergarten enrollment also is something always to watch out for across the district too. That is everything I had for my report for this month.
All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
And new
New
officers, please see Marcy for signatures. Need your signature.
With that, can we get a motion to adjourn? A second? All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned.